should introduce us to Barbara Lee.
Right. Barbara Lee is a congresswoman from right around Berkeley, California.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi, it's Barbara.
And she is someone who has been, in many ways, a lifelong activist.
Going all the way back to when she was 15 in high school in San Fernando Valley.
Because I wanted to be a cheerleader.
But, since this was the early 60s.
You had to have certain criteria, like, at least whether it was stated or not, blonde and blue-eyed.
That would have been hard for you, I would figure.
Yeah, and that was really hard. So I went to the NAACP.
She got them to pressure the school to change the rules.
And I won.
And she became the first black cheerleader at her high school.
Yeah.
That's just by way of introduction. Fast forward many years, she becomes a congresswoman. She gets elected to a second term. And on that day,
There is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon.
she was at the Capitol.
No one knew where to go, so the police officers just said, run, go, go, go.
This was a para-terrorist attack on our country.
So I ran out of the Capitol, walked down Pennsylvania Avenue. I remember looking back and saw a lot of smoke.
Which was, the Pentagon.
Clearly the country's under attack. Clearly people have died. Clearly we've got to deal with whoever did this, whatever it takes.
Fast forward 2 days, September 13th, Barbara Lee is back at the Capitol to meet with her Democratic colleagues to review that document that Flanagan had sent over.
The mood in the room was very somber and very angry.
And the thing we have to keep in mind when we're talking about this is all of this was done within 72 hours after the worst terrorist attack in United States history.
And very confused. What would be the appropriate response?
So, as she and her colleagues read those 60 words,
There was a lot of debate going on back and forth.
Oh yes, from everyone.
because this actually wasn't the first draft. Flanagan had sent one over the night before.
September 12, 2001.
And that one,
Was something that almost no one agreed to.
according to Gregory, that early draft had a few extra lines in it.
One gave the president the power to preempt any future acts of aggression against the United States.
And Barbara Lee and her colleagues knew
That look, so many things can be packed into this word aggression that if we sign on to this, that if we give the president this power, the president may never have to come back to Congress ever again and request authorization for military force, because he can say that anything is aggression, and we're also giving him the power to preempt.
So they kicked it back to the White House. Flanagan took out those words. And now they had this new draft.
That the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force.
Which is what you heard. But still, when Barbara read that and saw phrases like all necessary and appropriate force, she thought, what does that even mean?
I said this is too broad. It's not definitive. It's open-ended.
And as she was speaking, this is taking place in the basement of the Capitol building, she sees some of her Democratic colleagues start to nod.
Yeah, people were nodding. People were nodding.
Because everybody there knew the danger of ill-defined words. You just had to go back 50 years.
To the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah.
Gulf of Tonkin.
Tonkin.
Tonkin with an N.
Yes.
To explain.
My fellow Americans, as President and Commander-in-Chief,
1964, LBJ announces that 2 American ships
2 U.S. destroyers
parked in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam were torpedoed by North Vietnamese boats.
by a number of hostile vessels.
Many people now argue that one of these attacks never even happened. Nonetheless, President Johnson wanted to strike back, so he asked Congress,
To pass a resolution
which they did, giving him the power to, quote, take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression.
making it clear that our government is united in its determination to take all necessary measures in support of freedom and in defense of peace in Southeast Asia.
Now, it is the broad language of that document, most people believe, that opened the door to the worst part of the Vietnam War.
The Rangers and Marines took casualties, mostly from hidden snipers.
The thousands and thousands of casualties,
Keep dropping in. There's nothing you can do.
horrific atrocities,
Charges have been made that troops killed as many as 567 South Vietnamese civilians during a sweep in March 1968.
and in a television interview in 1969, when President Johnson was asked to justify it all, he said, you can't just blame him.
Congress gave us this authority in August 1964 to do whatever may be necessary. That's pretty far-reaching. That's the sky's the limit.
So the lessons of the Gulf of Tonkin and Vietnam, that was very much in the air in that meeting on September 13th, 2001.
Several key leaders hope to avoid a repeat of the 1964 Tonkin Gulf Resolution.
So it was understandable that when Barbara Lee stood up and said to her colleagues that she was worried about some of this language.
People were nodding. People were nodding. So there was a lot of uncertainty about what to do.
But in the end, those concerns were ultimately outweighed by another desire.
We've got to be unified with the president. We can't show political divisions.
Let's have the nation, let's have Congress speaking with one voice.
It was a time for unity and for action. And so walking out of that Democratic caucus meeting,
On the evening of September 13th,
congressional leadership decided that these 60 words,
this is the version. There's no going back to the drawing board. And so at 10:16 a.m., September 14th, 2001,
Senate will come to order.
the Senate is gavelled into session.
Clerk will call the roll.
Daschle calls a vote.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Allard, Mr. Allen,
There are 98 senators on the floor.
Mr. Durbin, Mr. Voinovich.
All 98 of them vote yay.
No senator voted in the negative.
So it was a sweep.
yeah. Later in the day, the resolution would go to the House, where Barbara Lee was a representative. Daschle had actually rushed the vote through the Senate.
Because the White House has called for a national prayer meeting at the National Cathedral
For the victims of 9/11.
that's supposed to start right at noon. And so
Right after the vote.
all the senators pour out of the Capitol and get onto the buses.
Now, at that moment, Barbara Lee,
She hadn't decided how it is that she was going to vote.
I struggled with it.
for the previous 2 nights, September 12th and 13th, she stayed up late.
Calling back to advisors, to friends in California.
We talked every day.
Including this guy. This is Ron Dellums.
I served for over 27 years in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Barbara used to be his chief of staff, and when he resigned, she won his congressional seat.
You know, she would say, well, what about this? And what do you think about that?
And we kind of talked through the emotional state of the country.
That we are feeling pain, anger, we're shocked.
Both Barbara and Ron were trained as psychiatric social workers, so they both knew that when a person is feeling all of those things, it's generally better to do nothing.
Yeah, Psychology 101. You don't make decisions when you're mourning, afraid.
On the other hand,
I believe, in unity too. I want to be unified with the president when the country's under attack.
I understood,
He didn't tell me, he didn't say which way I should vote.
but I did say to her, Barbara, however you vote, I will always respect you. You will always be friend. You will always be family.
so at that moment, with the memorial service about to start in a few hours till the House vote, Barbara Lee was at the Capitol.
I was in the cloakroom.
And since she wasn't sure how she was going to vote, she planned to skip the memorial service.
She wanted to stay, she wanted to think.
And then, I don't know what it was. It may have been the spirit moving me. I don't know. But at the very last minute,
She was drinking actually a can of ginger ale at the time.
I said, I think I'm going to go. And I just ran out. I probably was the last one on the bus. I had the can of ginger ale in my hand and ran down the steps and got on the bus.
She got to the cathedral, the House buses arrived about 30 minutes or so before the opening. And so for 30 minutes, she's in the cathedral,
About halfway back,
listening to the organ.
thinking about the families and those who were killed.
There are people around her who are sort of whispering,
The pain and anguish.
a few people who are crying,
I said, I got to pray over this.
and she's just wrestling with her vote. Her heart is saying one thing,
This is too broad.
and her head is saying,
Unity.
how is it that you can be against the president at this point?
Speaking of the president, eventually President Bush takes the podium.
We are here in the middle hour of our grief. Just 3 days removed from these events, Americans do not yet have the distance of history. But our responsibility to history is already clear. To answer these attacks and rid the world of evil.
And then as soon as President Bush steps down, everyone in the congregation stands up. And they sing the battle hymn of the Republic, which is a very powerful, a very moving piece of music but it's not the sort of thing that is typically sung at a memorial service. It's a very forward and almost aggressive sounding.
Plus the phrase, terrible swift sword.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It was not quite what I expected in a memorial service.
But the second speaker,
A reverend by the name of Nathan Baxter,
got up and he gave a reading from Jeremiah 31.
When ancient Israel suffered the excruciating pain and tragedy of militant aggression and destruction,
Hearing that all over again takes me right back there, and I remember
a voice is heard in Ramah,
lamenting and bitter weeping.
bitter weeping,
Rachel weeping for her children.
weeping for her children.
When he spoke, that's when, to me, it was the memorial.
And then he started to pray
For the healing of our grief-stricken hearts, for the souls and sacred memory of those who have been lost.
and he said something that really struck Barbara Lee.
Let us also pray for divine wisdom,
He said, as we act,
that as we act, we not become the evil we deplore.
That evil that we deplore. When he said that, I became it was the sense of peace and calm came over me.
and Barbara Lee says it was right then that she knew what she'd do.
The clerk will report the title. House Joint Resolution 64, joint resolution to authorize the use of United States armed...
Later that evening, the House opens up its debate on the AUMF.
Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution, which authorizes the President to use all force necessary.
And congressperson after congressperson
Mr. Speaker,
stands up.
I rise in support of this resolution.
Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight to fully endorse and authorize the use of force.
One after another.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the authorization.
I rise today in support of this resolution.
We will rally behind our president.
16 in a row. Until
Gentleman from California is recognized for a minute and a half.
we get to Barbara Lee.
Mr. Speaker, members, I rise today really with a very heavy heart. One that is filled with sorrow for the families and the loved ones who were killed and injured this week. Only the most foolish and the most callous would not understand the grief that has really gripped our people and millions across the world. Now, I have agonized over this vote, but I came to grips with it today, and I came to grips with opposing this resolution during the very painful yet very beautiful memorial service. As a member of the clergy so eloquently said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore.
Just after the vote, Barbara Lee says she was in the cloakroom again, and she starts getting accosted by colleagues.
all of these friends are coming up to her and saying, you've got to go back. You cannot vote this way.
Yes, I'm not changing my vote.
One of them actually said to her, look, you've done so much on HIV, you've done so much on AIDS. This vote is going to take you out. Think of the bigger picture.
They're saying you're dead.
Yeah,
But that's the right vote. I'm not going to give any president the authority to go to war, and we don't know what we're doing. You know, only Congress can declare war.
Help me on this, guys. Has the House vote... okay, the House has just now finished that vote. And we see one no vote.
the final vote for the House was 420 to 1.
We know it's a Democrat. We don't yet know who. We'll figure that out.
Barbara Lee was the only person in the Senate or the House to cast a no vote.
That must have been a very lonely moment.
To be perfectly honest with you, I said some prayers for my friend.
This was the right thing to do. And, you know, votes like this, you have to be ready to pay the consequences.
Over the next few weeks, months,
Her office was inundated with letters.
Barbara Lee, you are a traitor and a